Have you ever been on the receiving end of a rule so petty, so utterly nonsensical, that it makes you question the very fabric of civilized society? I have. And the piece of paper that started my personal revolution wasn't a lawsuit or a declaration of war. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, tucked officiously under the windshield wiper of my pickup truck, containing a $75 fine for improper display of laundry. I'm Jack, and for the last 10 years, I've owned Silver Creek Ranch, 100 acres of rolling hills and oak trees on the far edge of a sprawling development called Oakwood Preserve. I bought this land to escape the nonsense, to live a life governed by the seasons and the needs of my livestock, not by the whims of a committee. I'm a retired systems engineer, and I chose ranching because I craved tangible problems: a broken fence, a sick calf, a well pump on the fritz. Simple, honest problems with logical solutions. The Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association was, to my mind, a problem with no logic whatsoever. And its chief enforcer, a woman named Brenda, who patrolled the neighborhood in a golf cart with the grim determination of a tank commander, was its most illogical component. The crime? I had hung a set of freshly washed blue jeans and 2 work shirts on a clothesline strung between 2 ancient oak trees, just as I'd done 100 times before. The sun and the breeze are free, and they do a better job than any machine. But to Brenda, my simple act of self-sufficiency was a violation of aesthetic harmony. What she didn't know, as she scribbled her ticket with self-righteous glee, was that she wasn't just fining a simple rancher. She was poking a systems engineer who had spent 30 years designing elegant solutions to complex problems. And she had just presented me with the most interesting problem of my career. She thought she was correcting a minor infraction. In reality, she had just sparked a rebellion that would be powered by the very sun she didn't want shining on my laundry. This isn't just a story about beating an HOA. It's about how a single act of petty tyranny led to a grassroots movement that rewired our entire community. Have you ever wondered what happens when a bully pushes the wrong person just a little too far? Well, pull up a chair because you're about to find out. My first instinct wasn't revolution, it was reason. I figured this was a simple misunderstanding, a case of an overzealous volunteer needing a gentle course correction. With the fine notice in hand, I attended the next monthly HOA board meeting, held in the sterile, beige community clubhouse. The board consisted of 5 residents, but it was clear that Brenda, sitting beside the president with a thick binder labeled Covenants and Restrictions, was the real power in the room. When my turn came to speak, I stood up and explained the situation calmly. I described my ranch, its distance from the main development, and the simple, practical act of line-drying clothes. I even made a small joke about saving electricity. $75 seems a bit steep for doing something our grandparents would have considered a daily chore, I concluded, hoping for a sensible chuckle and a quiet dismissal of the fine. There was no chuckle. Brenda flipped open her binder with a snap that echoed in the silent room. "Mr. Callahan," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "As per Bylaw Section 14, Article C, external displays. All laundry drying must be confined to areas not visible from community roads or adjacent properties. Your clothesline is, by our measurement, visible from the walking path on the North Ridge, approximately 800 yards away. With binoculars, the absurdity of it was breathtaking." Binoculars? I looked at the board members, hoping to see a flicker of common sense. I saw nothing but blank faces, intimidated by Brenda's encyclopedic command of her petty rulebook. The president, a mild-mannered man named George, cleared his throat. "The rules are the rules, Jack. Brenda is just doing her job." I tried a different angle. "My property is over 100 acres. It's a working ranch, not a manicured suburban lot. There has to be some consideration for different types of property use within the preserve." Brenda smiled, a thin, triumphant slash. "The covenants apply to every parcel, regardless of size. An exemption for one is a slippery slope to chaos. Today it's your blue jeans. Tomorrow, old cars on blocks, rusted farm equipment. We have standards to maintain." The board voted unanimously to uphold the fine. I paid it, not because I agreed, but because a prolonged fight on their terms was a waste of energy. But as I walked back to my truck, a cold, clear determination settled over me. They wanted to play by the book? Fine. I would read that book every single page. And I would find a way to build something so completely, so beautifully within the rules that it would dismantle their entire power structure from the inside out. My days as a quiet rancher were over. The engineer had just been activated. The first thing I did was pay the fine. It's a crucial first step in any strategic conflict. Handle the small, immediate fires so you can focus on the long-term war. Paying it gave me a clean slate and removed any leverage they had over me for that specific infraction. Brenda saw it as a victory, a sign of my capitulation. I saw it as the cost of admission to the game. For the next week, she made a point of driving her golf cart slowly along the edge of my property, a smug little smile on her face. She even stopped once, got out, and took a picture of a wheelbarrow I'd left near the fence line. A warning notice for improper storage of garden equipment appeared in my mailbox the next day. This was her escalation. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was hunting for them. She was enjoying the power. That was the mistake every arrogant antagonist makes. They believe the fight is over when they've won the first skirmish. For me, the fight was just beginning. I poured a pot of strong black coffee, downloaded the entire Oakwood Preserve HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, all 284 pages of dense legalese, and printed it out. I did the same for the county zoning regulations and the state statutes on property rights and cooperatives. For 2 days, I sat at my kitchen table with highlighters and sticky notes, cross-referencing every line. It was like debugging a massive, poorly written piece of code. The HOA rules were a masterpiece of petty control. They dictated the color you could paint your mailbox, the type of shrubs you could plant, and, of course, the mortal sin of visible laundry. But as I dug deeper, I started to see the gaps. The document was written for quarter-acre suburban lots, not for a 100-acre agricultural property like mine. Its authors had never conceived of someone like me. Then, on the third day, I found it. It wasn't one thing, but a beautiful confluence of 3 separate loopholes. First, the HOA bylaws had no jurisdiction over structures classified as agricultural buildings under county code, as long as they weren't used as primary residences. Second, while the state had regulations for public utilities, it had very favorable laws encouraging the formation of private, nonprofit cooperatives for shared resources. Third, and this was the kicker, the HOA rules were completely silent on the installation of solar panels, an oversight from the document's creation in the early 90s. My mind, trained to see systems and connections, lit up. The path forward became crystal clear. I wouldn't just fight their rule, I would render it obsolete. I wouldn't just hang my laundry, I would invite the entire neighborhood to hang theirs. I sketched it out on a notepad, a large, open-sided structure, legally an agricultural barn, on its sprawling roof, a massive solar array, perfectly legal and unregulated by the HOA. Inside, a dozen high-efficiency, commercial-grade washers and dryers, all powered by the sun. It wouldn't be a business. It would be the Oakwood Community Laundry Co-op, a nonprofit entity owned and operated by its members. For a small annual fee, any resident could come and do their laundry for free, powered by clean energy. And, of course, surrounding the barn would be acres of sturdy, HOA-proof clotheslines for those who preferred the sun-dried method. Brenda wanted to police my one clothesline. I was about to erect 50 of them and shield them with the full protection of county, state, and corporate law. The planning phase was where the engineer in me truly came alive. This couldn't just be a spite project. It had to be elegant, efficient, and most importantly, legally unassailable. I spent the next month working late into the night, not in a dusty library of law books, but in my workshop surrounded by blueprints and schematics. The first challenge was the structure itself. I designed a simple pole barn, 60 feet by 40 feet, with a metal roof pitched at the perfect angle for maximum solar exposure. I classified it as an equipment and feed storage barn on the permit application to the county. This was technically true. It would house equipment, laundry equipment, and the cooperative supplies. The county planning office, used to dealing with ranchers, barely batted an eye. They cared about setbacks, environmental impact, and structural integrity, all of which I had meticulously documented. They approved the permit in less than 2 weeks. Next came the power system. This was my favorite part. I designed a 25 kilowatt off-grid solar system, complete with a battery bank that could store enough energy to run the facility for 3 days without sun. I sourced the panels from a wholesaler in Arizona and the inverters and batteries from a specialty supplier in Colorado. It was a significant investment, but I considered it the seed capital for a new kind of community. While I waited for the components to arrive, I drafted the co-op's articles of incorporation and bylaws. I used a standard template for a nonprofit agricultural cooperative, adapting it for a specific purpose. Membership would be open to any resident of Oakwood Preserve. A one-time buy-in fee of $50 would make them a member owner, and a small annual due of another $50 would cover maintenance, insurance, and supplies. In exchange, they got unlimited access to the facility. This structure was key. By making it a nonprofit co-op, it wasn't a commercial enterprise that the HOA could try to regulate. It was a private association of property owners sharing a resource on private land, my land. I was simply the host. I even included a clause stating that one of the co-op's missions was to promote sustainable living practices, including solar power generation and energy-free clothes drying. I was building a legal fortress, brick by brick. My final preparatory step was to quietly file all the necessary paperwork with the state to officially establish the Oakwood Community Solar Co-op. The state seal on that certificate was my shield. Brenda, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. She'd see my truck going back and forth, but she likely assumed I was just tending to my ranch. She was so focused on looking for dandelions in my lawn that she completely missed the earthquake I was building right under her feet. The first tangible sign of my plan breaking ground was the arrival of a concrete truck. It rumbled down the long gravel driveway to a cleared, level spot about 200 yards from my house, a location I'd specifically chosen to be highly visible from that same walking path Brenda had mentioned. The crew poured a perfect 60 by 40-foot slab, the foundation for what was to come. That got her attention. The very next afternoon, her golf cart came to a halt at my property line. She didn't get out, just sat there, arms crossed, staring at the fresh gray rectangle. She had her official HOA polo shirt on, the neighborhood's symbol of petty authority. I was mending a fence nearby and gave her a polite wave. She didn't wave back, just narrowed her eyes before zipping away. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. It was a notice of unapproved construction, citing a violation of the bylaws prohibiting any outbuildings or structures erected without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which she, of course, chaired. The letter demanded an immediate cessation of all work and a written explanation to be submitted to her committee. I smiled as I read it. This was the move I had anticipated. I simply photocopied my county-approved building permit for an agricultural structure, circled the approval stamp in red ink, and mailed it back to the HOA office with a one-sentence cover letter. For your records, the silence that followed was deafening. She had no authority to override a county permit for an agricultural building on agriculturally zoned land. It was the first crack in her armor, a direct hit against her perceived omnipotence. A week later, the truck carrying the massive timber posts and roof trusses for the pole barn arrived. My neighbor, a retired carpenter named Dave, who had his own quiet grievances with the HOA, had agreed to help me frame the structure in exchange for a lifetime membership in the co-op. As we started hoisting the first posts into place, Brenda reappeared, this time with George, the HOA president, in tow. They stood at the edge of my land, looking flustered. "Jack, what is all this?" George asked, gesturing weakly at the skeleton of the barn. "It's a barn, George," I said, not missing a beat with my drill. "For my ranch, a barn? For what?" Brenda interjected, her voice sharp. "The committee didn't approve this." "Didn't need to," I said cheerfully. "County did. It's an AG building. You should check your own bylaws, Brenda. Section 21, I believe, exempts agricultural structures." The look on her face was a mixture of fury and confusion. She was so used to people cowering before her binder of rules that the idea of someone having read it more carefully than her was inconceivable. She sputtered, trying to find a foothold. "We'll see about this. We'll be talking to our lawyer. You do that," I said, turning back to my work. "Tell him to look up County Zoning Ordinance 734 while he's at it." As they retreated in their golf cart, I knew the real battle was still to come, but I had won the crucial opening phase. The structure was going up, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The game board was set, and my pieces were moving into position. As the barn's metal roof went on, reflecting the bright Texas sun, curiosity in the neighborhood began to bubble over. People I'd only ever waved to started stopping their cars at the end of my driveway. "Building a new workshop, Jack?" one would ask. "Big project you've got there," another would say. To each, I gave a friendly but vague answer. Just a new community project. More details coming soon. This calculated bit of mystery was intentional. I wanted Buzz to build organically before Brenda could try to poison the well with her version of events. My first official recruits were Dave, my carpenter neighbor, and a young couple down the street, the Garcias, who had been fined for having a small, inflatable kiddie pool in their front yard for more than 48 hours. I invited them over one evening, let them see the nearly completed structure, and laid out the entire plan on my kitchen table. Dave, a man of few words, just nodded slowly and said, "I'll be damned. You're building a fortress right under her nose." Maria Garcia, an accountant, immediately saw the beauty of a nonprofit co-op structure. "It's brilliant," she said, her eyes wide. "The HOA can't touch a nonprofit cooperative's internal operations. As long as we follow state law, we're completely insulated." They were in, and they became my first ambassadors. Quietly, they started talking to other neighbors, people who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's reign of terror. The family fined for having the wrong shade of white on their trim. The gardener cited for a disorderly vegetable patch. The teenager who got a violation for leaving his skateboard on the porch. Each had a story, a small cut from 1,000 paper cuts tyranny. The list of potential members grew quickly. Meanwhile, the biggest delivery arrived. A flatbed truck carrying 20 pallets of solar panels. This was a declaration. This wasn't just a barn anymore. This was something different, something modern and significant. Brenda couldn't have missed it. I imagined her watching through those binoculars from the ridge, her mind racing to find an angle, a rule, any justification to stop me. She was an analog enforcer in a digital world I was creating, and her playbook was becoming obsolete with every panel I hoisted onto that roof. I hired a certified electrician, a requirement for connecting the system, and he and I spent the next 2 weeks wiring the entire array. When we were done, and the final inspection was passed by the county, I stood back and looked at my creation. The barn was simple and sturdy, but the roof was a thing of beauty, a vast, dark grid of photovoltaic cells, silently drinking in the sunlight. It was the engine of my rebellion, and it was almost ready to be turned on. The official notices started arriving with renewed ferocity. Brenda, having clearly consulted the HOA's lawyer and found her position on the barn itself to be untenable, pivoted to a new line of attack. The letters were no longer about unapproved construction, but about the intended use of the property. I received a cease and desist order for operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise. Another notice warned of fines for creating a public nuisance due to anticipated traffic. A third, more creative letter cited potential violations of noise ordinances, despite the fact that the only sound the facility would make was the gentle hum of an inverter and the quiet slosh of washing machines. Each letter was more desperate than the last. She was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. I filed each one neatly in a folder labeled Brenda's Fan Mail. My response was not to argue, but to accelerate. The commercial-grade washers and dryers were delivered and installed. I ran the plumbing for my well and installed a state-of-the-art gray water recycling system to irrigate a patch of wildflowers I planned to plant nearby, ensuring the project was as sustainable as possible. The final piece of the puzzle was the clotheslines. I didn't just string up one or two. I installed 20 long, sturdy lines with heavy-duty steel posts sunk in concrete, creating a veritable city of sun-drying potential. It was a beautiful, defiant sight. I sent out a simple, elegantly designed invitation via email to every single resident in Oakwood Preserve. You are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Oakwood Community Solar Co-op. Join your neighbors for a tour of our new 100% solar-powered laundry facility. Learn how you can become a member owner and enjoy free, sustainable laundry for years to come. Refreshments will be served. I set the date for the following Saturday. The RSVP list filled up faster than I could have imagined. Over 100 families confirmed they would attend. The night before the grand opening, as I stood by the silent, ready facility, I saw the headlights of Brenda's golf cart cut through the darkness. It parked at the usual spot on the road. She just sat there for a long time, the dark shape of the barn and the glint of the solar panels under the moonlight silhouetted against the sky. She wasn't just looking at a building. She was looking at the end of her authority. She was a queen staring at a castle she couldn't conquer, built right in the heart of her kingdom. The stage was set for the final confrontation. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I had my permits, my co-op charter, and my state registration, all neatly arranged in a binder of my own. She had her rules. I had the system. The day of the grand opening was bright and sunny, a perfect day for making power and drying laundry. By 10 a.m., my property looked more like a county fair than a private ranch. Cars were parked all along the gravel drive, and dozens of my neighbors milled around the new barn, marveling at the scale of it. The kids were chasing each other through the forest of clotheslines, and the adults were examining the gleaming solar panels and the row of silent washing machines. Dave was proudly explaining the barn's timber frame construction, while Maria Garcia, our new co-op treasurer, sat at a welcome table, signing up new members. We already had over 50 households officially joined before the event even started. The atmosphere was festive, a genuine community gathering. Then, right on cue, Brenda's golf cart appeared, cutting through the crowd like a shark's fin through water. She brought backup this time, 2 other members of the Architectural Review Committee, both looking deeply uncomfortable. She parked the cart dramatically in front of the barn entrance, got out, and held up her hand for silence. She had a clipboard, of course. It was her scepter of power. "This isn't a legal assembly," she announced, her voice straining to project authority. "And this facility is a flagrant violation of HOA covenants. I am ordering this to be shut down immediately." A hush fell over the crowd. Everyone turned to look at me. This was the moment. I walked calmly to the front, stood beside Brenda, and took the microphone I had set up for the welcome speech. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice relaxed and clear through the speaker. "And thank you for coming. Brenda, thank you for coming as well. You're actually the inspiration for all of this." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "This is not a joke, Mr. Callahan. You are operating a commercial laundromat on residential property." "Actually," I said, holding up my own binder, "I'm not. This is the Oakwood Community Solar Co-op, a legally registered nonprofit cooperative under the laws of this state." I held up the certificate of incorporation with its official state seal. "It's not a business. It's a shared resource owned by its members. And as of this morning, that includes 53 of your friends and neighbors standing right here." A wave of murmurs went through the crowd as people looked around, realizing how many of them had already joined the rebellion. Brenda stared at the state certificate as if it were written in a foreign language. Her entire framework of power was based on the HOA's private rules, and I had just introduced a higher authority. "That doesn't matter," she insisted, her voice getting a bit shrill. "The HOA covenants prohibit this kind of activity. You are creating traffic, noise. It's a nuisance." "Let's talk about those covenants, shall we?" I said, my tone remaining perfectly even. I opened my binder. First, the structure. As you were previously informed, this is a county-approved agricultural building on agriculturally zoned land, which your own bylaws explicitly exempt from architectural review. Here is the stamped county permit. I held it up for all to see. Second, the solar array. I've read the CNRS cover to cover, Brenda, all 284 pages, and there is not one single word in there that governs, restricts, or even mentions solar panels. A fascinating oversight for a document written in the 1990s, her face was turning a blotchy red. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Third, the nuisance claim, I continued. The washers are high-efficiency models, quieter than a dishwasher. The power system is silent. And the traffic? It's just a bunch of neighbors visiting a friend's property, which I'm pretty sure is still legal in this country. And finally, the core of it all, the cooperative. This is private land. The state of Texas recognizes our right to form a private, nonprofit cooperative to share resources. The HOA has no more authority to shut this down than it has to tell me what brand of coffee I can serve in my kitchen. I paused, letting the logic settle. I then turned to the crowd. Brenda fined me $75 for hanging my jeans on a clothesline. She believes that maintaining property values means telling people how to live, down to the smallest detail. I believe it means building a stronger community. This co-op will save every member family hundreds of dollars a year. It runs on clean energy. It gives us a place to meet and work together. It turns a chore into a community activity. I looked directly at Brenda. Her clipboard was now hanging limply at her side. Her committee members were inching away from her. You tried to enforce a rule designed to hide the simple act of living. I said, my voice firm but not angry. In response, I've created a place where we can celebrate it, out in the open, powered by the sun. You didn't want to see. A slow clap started from the back, from Dave. Then the Garcias joined in, and within seconds, the entire crowd erupted in applause. Brenda stood there, utterly defeated. Her power wasn't in the rules. It was in the intimidation, in the belief that no one would ever challenge her. I hadn't just built a laundry. I had built a new precedent. She turned, without another word, and retreated to her golf cart, her public humiliation complete. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda didn't just lose the battle. She lost her entire reason for being. Her authority, built on a foundation of bluff and bureaucratic bullying, evaporated in the sunshine of that Saturday morning. She resigned from the Architectural Review Committee and the HOA board via a terse email the following Monday. I heard she put her house up for sale a month later. The petty tyrant had been deposed not by anger, but by superior engineering and an unshakable legal framework. The Oakwood Community Solar Co-op, on the other hand, was an overwhelming success. Within 2 months, over half the households in the entire development had become member owners. The facility was in constant, happy use. On any given day, you'd find neighbors chatting by the clotheslines while their kids played or sharing tips on stain removal inside the barn. It became the unofficial new community center, a place of connection forged from a shared, practical task. The HOA board, now free from Brenda's influence, was forced into a period of soul-searching. A special meeting was called, not to condemn me, but to discuss how their governing documents had become so outdated and adversarial. I was invited to speak, not as a defendant, but as a consultant. I helped them form a modernization committee, and over the next year, we worked together to overhaul the covenants. We didn't eliminate all the rules, but we injected them with common sense, flexibility, and a new preamble that emphasized community and sustainability over sterile uniformity. The infamous laundry rule was the very first to be struck from books. For me, life at Silver Creek Ranch became better than I could have imagined. I had the peace I always wanted, but it wasn't a solitary peace anymore. It was a shared peace, woven into the fabric of a community I had accidentally helped to build. The project had paid for itself in goodwill 100 times over, and the solar array generated more than enough power, a constant, silent reminder of what was possible. I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to fight an unjust system isn't to tear it down, but to build a better, smarter, and more elegant system right beside it. You don't argue with the darkness. You just turn on a light so bright it makes the shadows disappear. My blue jeans now dry on a line in the open sun, swaying in the breeze for all to see. They're no longer a symbol of defiance, but a simple, beautiful part of a community that learned to embrace the light. So I'll ask you this. What outdated rule in your life is just waiting for a better system to make it obsolete?